Hello, we are the Hot and Spicy Podcast. It's me and Jordan coming in here to talk about the Premier League and our predictions for today. All right, so today we're looking at the different predictions of the Premier League, what we think is going to happen, and who we think is going to finish where, etc., etc. And that's kind of just how it is. So, Jordan, do you want to kick us off? Oh, by the way, I've had a really good sandwich this morning and I'm in a good mood. Jordan, do you want to kick us off? Who have you got in the relegation spot?
So starting out with my relegation spots, and I think you and I will probably be quite similar with these because we hate most of the teams in the Premier League. At least I know you do. Starting out, I've actually got West Ham will be finishing dead last.
You have West Ham there.
Does that what? Do you have something different?
Well, I feel like they're pretty traditional. They're a kind of team that you expect to be in the Premier League. So I put a team that you don't expect to be in the Premier League, which is Fulham. I actually think they're just going to go straight back down. They will struggle in the Premier League this season. They'll go back down. But I do feel like that when they go back down, they'll keep all their players and they'll become like a real strong force to be reckoned with, and they'll just come straight back up and absolutely wreck the Premier League the season they come back.
So what you're saying is 2022 season we can expect to see Fulham probably like Champions League spots, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at their squad, they've got a decent forward, Alexander Mitrovic, but everyone else is just pretty like standard Championship.
Yeah, no, makes sense. So who have you got sitting just above Fulham then? Is it another team that can do the same thing, or?
Well, I got Southampton, and Southampton I feel like they've got players like Redmond and Danny Ings, but I mean Redmond's already reached his peak. He was probably way better when he was at Norwich, to be honest. And Danny Ings is he's just ever since he went to Liverpool, he just went downhill. Yeah. And I'd say the rest of their players, they need to sign some fresh blood. They need some youth, some bright young players to keep their team up. That's gonna some hyperactive bunnies in the midfield, etc., etc. But I just feel like they're gonna struggle this season.
Well, I think we should actually just preface this by saying Mark is a Norwich City supporter, who was sadly relegated last season. But he reckons they'll be straight back up. That's fine. I myself am a Leeds United supporter. Brainless as you'd expect. I'm very proud to be back in the Premier League this season. So when Mark is talking about Norwich, just take it with a grain of salt as always. But in my 19th position, I've actually got Newcastle.
Why is that, Jordan?
I just don't think that they're very good. Is that enough to sort of say, or do you want a little bit more?
I mean, I put them higher up on my list, and I'll talk about them when I get to them. Who have you got on 18th?
Sitting up in 18th spot, I've actually got Fulham. So I'm of the same sort of ilk as you around them going straight back down. I think that they'll still, like I say, obviously, I think they'll do better than Newcastle and West Ham. But I do think that they're going straight back down. They definitely, in my books, they didn't earn that promotion as much as I think a team like Brentford actually earned it, but sadly didn't get. So I do think they'll be going straight back down. And, who do you put in at 18?
I put West Ham, and I mean, when you got someone like a rocker solid, he's injury prone, but you got someone like Winston Reid, classic Kiwi man. Everyone knows him down here in New Zealand. Winston Reid was on loan to Sporting Kansas City, but if you look at the rest of their squad, you got players like Andy Carroll absolutely past it. He's not, he's injury prone as well, and I just think their side needs a big rebuild. That's all it
needs
is,
some youth putting into it, is what you're saying. Not specifically youth, but some experienced, slightly younger players. I mean, Carroll's been around for fucking decades.
Yeah, and that's the thing. With West Ham, it's more, and this is what happens with a lot of mid-table teams. And West Ham was one of those mid-table teams back in a few seasons back. But the one thing that I think all of them need, if they don't have the financial capabilities to kind of sign the players to keep them in the Premier League, they need a rebuild. They need to go back down. And yeah, as you can see, that's what Norwich is. Norwich solely rely on their youth academy, and that's exactly what it is, So I feel like West Ham kind of need to go down into the Championship, rebuild, and then pop back up again. That's kind of why I put them there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that's sort of a good note to sort of finish the relegation spots on. Although you do have to think that depending on how the season starts, how the managers even go, we could be, miles off with all three of those, and all of a sudden we see, I don't know, Arsenal sitting in relegation spots. It'll be enjoyable, but very unlikely, you'd say.
Yeah, that's exactly that.
Okay, so sitting just outside of the relegation spots, let's just go through the next 3, okay? Just go straight through those.
So we've got... So for those of you who don't understand how to count, we go from 15th, 16th, and 17th place.
So we're going 15th, then 16th, then 17th. No?
No. Those are the places, but we're going to start from 17th up to 15th.
Well, my 17th, I've actually got Southampton.
Okay, go on.
16th place, I'm going to have West Brom, and 15th, I've got Brighton. Now, Southampton, so far, I believe they've only actually brought in 2 players, being Mo Salisu and Kyle Walker. I don't think that's going to be enough to actually put them further up the table at this point. They're kind of just going to be sitting there as a bogey team. The possibility that they pull something else out, possibility that obviously they don't. West Brom, I'm looking at that as...
Sorry. Just to go back to Southampton, Jordan means Walker-Peters.
Sorry, Walker-Peters. It's entirely my fault.
Go on.
West Brom, I think, a team that definitely deserves to come up to the Premier League for this season, but I don't think they're going to make much of it. And then obviously I've got Brighton sitting there in 15th. Just your generic middle to lower, I guess, Premier League team. I just don't see much for them.
So for me, back in 2006, I always saw West Brom with that team that no one wanted in the Premier League. That's when I was watching the Premier League heavily. I was good old 11 years old. And West Brom held on. They were one of those teams that held on. And I think one season actually it was Southampton, Crystal Palace and Norwich went down. I've always seen West Brom as one of those teams that they were one of those teams that could compete in the Premier League, but they never had anything special, if you know what I mean. So one thing I think they're going to do is they're going to survive at 17th. And I feel like they'll barely do it. But one thing that they could do, and this is up to them if they can and they have the financial capabilities to do it, is to rebuild for the next season. But I think, in a sense, they'll struggle to survive. They'll be in that relegation battle. But I'm putting them at 17th because I do feel like they have a spot in the Premier League, but they're always that team that, they'll get 3 points against the lower teams. They'll get probably a draw against the mid-table teams, but they'll struggle heavily against the top 7 or 8. That's just how I always saw them, and they were always that team that just hung around 15th, 16th, 17th, That's just kind of how I always saw them. So for 16th, I have put Brighton. And I feel like when you've got a player like Lewis Dunk, who's an absolute beast, he is a player that can hold a team together, and I feel like he'll literally be the heart and soul of Brighton this season. They're gonna struggle at times, and I feel like they'll survive. I feel like they will survive the season. The only thing is with Brighton is just they haven't been in the Premier League long enough to create a stable position. So I think for them it's kind of just a battle to survive. So I put them in 16th because I feel like they'll be a better side than West Brom. And obviously the bottom 3. In 15th, I put Newcastle. And while I think Newcastle have the money, they've got the money to keep them in the Premier League. The thing is, they need to get rid of their coach if they want to play decent football.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at it this way. You've got coaches like Sir Alex Ferguson. Oh, sorry, I just hit my microphone. You got coaches like Sir Alex Ferguson, who was a classic old-style coach, but he did everything right. The thing with Steve Bruce is he's kind of that coach that he's a bit like Mark Hughes, where he tries to implement this really old-fashioned style of play, and to be honest, it doesn't really work these days. The old-fashioned style of play works if you've got a team of hack and slash kind of players, but if you've got a team in Newcastle with players like Alan Saint-Maximin and all the kind of current crop of the Flagstaff brothers and all that stuff, or is it Flagstaff? No, Longstaff. What am I saying? If you've got those kind of players who are all young and come up from this generation, yet you've got an old dog teaching them old tricks. It's not like it's gonna, they're not gonna do too well.
It delays their progress as well, is what you're saying. Especially when you then want to loan them out to another club and they're getting taught something by a younger, more, I guess, up-to-date manager when they're getting taught something else, and it delays their progress quite a bit. And I guess it'd explain why you then don't see those teams really pulling through towards the back end of the season, because it's just not working for them.
Yeah, and that's like, let's be honest, it's kind of like, I had a coach once who was basically, for me growing up as a player, I was one of those guys who was just smart, played it simple, had the ball very technical, but my coach always encouraged me to be one of those hard, like, going hard, win the ball kind of players, and obviously it resulted in me being injured, So, but you look at these days with the kids coming through there, and I'm talking about New Zealand here, coming through the youth academies and stuff, like, a player like Sarpreet Singh, you cannot teach to be a hard man.
No, not when he's the size of a stick. It just doesn't work.
Well, yeah, I know, but he is very technical though. He is a very smart player, and the thing is though, like Newcastle have someone like Steve Bruce. They need to get rid of him. They need to have a coach that will use players to their strengths and weaknesses rather than saying, oh, all players need to be hard men, sliding in, winning the ball. Like that's kind of what I'm trying to say. So I think with Newcastle, I feel like they could do way better than they currently are, but they're currently just sitting at 15th just because.
So you're basically also comparing yourself to Sarpreet Singh and saying that you'd be, easily injured, but also one of the best players that we've ever seen.
No, I don't think I'd be anywhere as good as Sarpreet Singh. I was more of a Declan.
One of those. Okay, yeah, I see that. And then I guess just on the fact that we've both mentioned Brighton now, Aaron Moy heading over to China. Does it mean much to you?
Oh. Well, I mean, you know why he's there. He's obviously getting a decent paycheck.
Well, pretty obvious. I mean, to be fair, I'm not going to say I didn't rate him. I'm not going to say I do rate him. It's just kind of a nice little tidbit to bring up when you think of Aaron Moy. He played in the A-League, so you just got to kind of, you pick and choose where you can.
Yeah. And just for the record, I said Flagstaff Brothers is actually Longstaff. Yeah, no, that was my fault.
So I suppose if we want to start moving up, we can probably go up in another 3. So 14th, 13th, and 12th spots. I've actually got Palace, Villa, and Wolves sitting there for my 14, 13, and 12.
Before you go, I'm actually like Googling his name. Wait, hold up.
Who's
I've got it wrong. Who are the brothers I'm talking about? Like in Newcastle. Like, this is bothering me now. Like I literally looked at them and I was like looking at them last night and I'm like, these guys are class, like, they're young kids and all that, and like, but I kind of just butchered their names. I'm like having a nightmare at the moment. What is going on?
I don't even know.
My goodness. Oh, Jordan, mate. We look like the worst Premier League
Well,
fans
to be fair, you don't even have a team in the Premier League. I've got a team that's been back in the Premier League for the first time in 17 fucking years. What do you what do you expect to come of this?
I don't know, but like, I'm just looking up now like who they are, and
Longstaff.
Obviously this is pretty clear.
It is.
Longstaff.
Yeah, Sean and Maddie Longstaff.
Yeah, that's
you were right the second time after it.
Sorry, that's my fault.
Okay, so
I'm a bit of a mate. I called them Flagstaff before. That's funny. You know what's funny? There's an organisation that I work closely with in conjunction with the company I work with called Flagstaff.
I know that company. Yeah.
So this is where I went wrong. Okay.
It's definitely not cover staff.
So where are we at?
No. What, providing temps?
So we're at 14, 13 to 12.
Sorry. 14, 13, and 12. So yeah, Palace, Villa, and Wolves on my end of things. What about yourself?
I put Villa, Palace, Sheffield.
Sheffield.
Yeah, I'll get into that. You go first. I'll talk about Sheffield in a minute.
Personally, and this is it's all personal stuff. I just feel like those 3 teams specifically, Palace, Villa, Wolves, they're mid-table teams. You don't often see them pushing for it. It was, I suppose, kind of lucky with Wolves sliding up into, 7th position last year, I think. But it just feels to me like you get these occasional good seasons from these teams. You get the occasional bad season. Wolves obviously had a decent season last time. Villa and Palace both sort of averaged out. Villa very lucky to avoid relegation, mind you. But obviously, to me, that then tells me that they've survived that season in the Premier League after coming up from the Championship. And this is probably their time to just hit that mid-table run, I guess.
I think, from my end, the way I saw Villa is they're one of the teams, like, if you go back to 2009, and I think when they had the likes of, like, Agbon Lahore and like those kind of players. And I think Nigel Reo-Coker was there, was he?
Yeah, probably.
I can't remember. Like honestly, this was one of those times where I'm trying to remember, like refresh my memory. But there was a season where they finished 5th. They did really well, and then I think they had like Alex McLeish a few seasons, and he kind of like destroyed the club. But for me personally, I've always rated Villa as one of those top teams, and when they've got someone like Grealish, who is very, very dangerous as a player, like I rate him as good as someone like James Maddison. And I feel like Grealish is one of those players that could win important games for Villa. So there's obviously, when it comes to being a club like surviving relegation, you learn from what you did the previous season if you've got the core of the team together. So the thing that I see is like with Villa, there could be games that are like that, that if they didn't have Grealish, it'd be 1-1 draw, 0-0 draw, like 2-2 draw or something. But if they do have a player like Grealish who can score winning goals, or create chances for the team, because he's one of those players that just creates, like he's a playmaker. He's got creativity. He's one of those players that I feel like could win games for Villa, and very important ones. The reason why I put Palace there, I've just always thought they were just like a team that they just sat around like somewhere around that area, and I feel like they'll do the same. That's just kind of what Palace has always been. Sheffield. So Sheffield is one of those teams that, and they did what Leeds are trying to do this season, and basically they came up, and I guess you could say they spent a lot in their first season back, but they basically tried their best to do well in their first season back. And when you come into the second season, that's always harder than coming back as the first season, because as a promoted team, no one thinks much of you. They're kind of like, oh, it's an easy win. And then you defy expectations, you do well, and the momentum catches up. Your second season, there's a lot more pressure because people say, oh, yeah, Sheffield did well this season. We're going to come in a lot harder. That's always the mentality. And I feel like Sheffield will struggle a little bit than they did last season.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So I've always seen that. And I've seen that with clubs like, for example, I think when Wigan first came up, I think halfway through the season, they were sitting in second. They were like one of those teams that just like absolutely destroyed everyone, and they had people like Kamara and like those kind of players that just were able to carry the team back then. But yeah, you look at it this way, like I feel like Sheffield will be a mid-table team from now on. It's a lot harder trying to play in your second season up rather than your first season. So that's kind of how I always saw it. So yeah, that's why Sheffield I think will be 12.
That's fair. I can totally understand that, and I guess that sort of sets a challenge for Leeds as well now, with you putting it that way, to do that whole stay up one season, put the effort in for both seasons, I guess, depending on how well it all goes. But no, that definitely makes sense. So I believe you and I both have the same pick for the 11th spot. Being Burnley.
Good old Burnley. Sam Vokes, Chris Wood combination up top.
Look, when you're from, when you're from New Zealand and so involved in football in New Zealand, as you and I both are and have been for quite a while, you tend to just want to hold on to some of the top players, and with Chris Wood also being an ex-Leeds striker as well. I obviously hold on to him from there as well as the New Zealand football side of things. And I generally hope that, to be fair, most seasons, I just have that hope that Burnley do decently, just so as Chris Wood stays in that Premier League spot, Is that too much to ask, or is that kind of out of it?
I always thought Chris Wood was one of those strikers that if you let him have too much time on the ball and it's a matter of seconds, if he's one of those, like if he gets like literally 2 or 3 seconds with no one around him, he can do some serious damage.
Entirely.
He is one of those like strikers, and obviously me watching a lot of All Whites games in New Zealand, like all that kind of stuff, because I've been watching the All Whites for a while. Like he's one of those players that like you give him like Mexico were just like real slack with him in the Confederations Cup a few years ago, and he scored and put New Zealand up 1-0, and then that's when the Mexicans were like, holy moly, okay, no, we got to actually play now. So. Yeah. Whoa, okay. Nah, hold up. Hold up. Whoa, okay. Yeah, okay, nah. All right, let's pretend that didn't happen.
We'll maybe edit that out, or maybe just leave it in there, and I'll put like a photo of some guy wearing a sombrero and dancing around holding guacamole. Okay.
So yeah, I always thought like when I stood next to Chris Wood, in 2017, I was doing a bit of internship work for New Zealand Football, and I stood next to him, and like I just looked next to me, and this guy is the biggest guy I've ever seen. Like his shoulders were the same size as my head. You know, there was all sorts. I was sitting there like, what is going on? You know what I mean? How is this guy big? So anyway, I came and spoke to him. I was like, what do you think of Norwich, like, as a team? And he's like, oh, yeah, they're not too bad. You know, I scored 2 goals against them. So, yeah, and I'm busy sitting here like, oh, man, I seriously, like, you know, like, I can't believe
you're chatting shit about my team, Chris, but it's fine. You scored them and I don't want to fight you.
Yeah, no, I would not want to fight him.
Scared he'd break your knee.
Yeah, well, no, he just needs to touch me and I'll probably like fall over. Like a little bit of a, like, you know, like a little poke to the shoulder, you know. Yeah, but no, I seriously think like Burnley in general, like very, very solid team. Like right now they're in the, I always see Premier League teams like Burnley, mid-table teams go through like a 5-year stint, and then they have to go through a rebuild stage. So I see them currently in year 4. So that rebuild stage will need to happen within the next 2 to 3 years. So, you know, it'd be good for Chris to remain there, being a core part of the team. I do know he's got a lot of competition though. So this is one of those things, you know, like obviously Sam Vokes is a very, very good player, but yeah, Chris Wood's one of those players, hold the ball up, you know, and then like obviously when the ball's in the box, he'll just like, he comes in with his big brute, like, you know, ness and just, you know, puts it in the back of the net. So, that's kind of how I always saw him as a forward, and I feel like Burnley will be one of those teams that just, you know, like they'll do a lot of damage to the big teams. They'll take points out of the big teams, and you know, and then they'll obviously barely edge, I'd say, the smaller teams, and they'll lose a few, which is normal for a mid-table team. But they'll do well. They'll survive.
But one thing I'd just like to point out is when you talk about Chris Wood, as a striker when he was with Leeds, he was very much an opportunistic striker. He'd score the occasional decent goal from distance, and you know, with a bit of shine and a bit of dazzle, but he was always there to just poke it in at the last second if that's what he actually had to do. And a lot of people just thought he was, I guess, being very much overrated for the simple fact that a lot of the goals he was scoring were just being fed to him on a plate. You know, middle of the 6-yard box, go ahead, stick it in. But he has actually, since moving to Burnley, started to prove himself as a true Premier League striker. And as you say, give him too much room and it's all over for you.
Just so everyone knows, we know that there's about 26 other players at Burnley. We just talk about, like, Chris Wood's not the only Burnley player. We're aware of that. Oh, no. Or in New Zealand, like, you know, you hear about all these players, but when you hear Burnley, oh, Chris Wood. So basically, we'll change that number 11 spot. Burnley's no longer the club name. Okay. It's called Chris Wood.
I will. I'll note that down. That is now Chris Wood.
Yeah. Make sure you put a picture of him.
Done. Okay. So myself and Mark had a quick discussion after we finished recording this and realized we had about another 40 minutes of audio to go through. So we've decided to actually split this off into 2 separate little podcasts. This one obviously being the bottom 10 teams. The next one will obviously be the top 10 teams. So make sure you stick around, hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those lovely places to catch up with us as soon as we get that little bit of extra audio out.